Hello, everybody. I trust you can see me and hear me. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. I want to welcome you to today's live stream event. It's one in which I will be fielding your questions. And so we were debating whether to call this Ask Me Anything or show me your toughest questions. Easy questions are fine too. I'm very happy to be with you today and to address your questions. And I'm glad to know the volunteers are letting me know you can see and hear me. So that's great. It's a pleasure to be here. We do these live stream events every 3 weeks. And we have a special one coming up 3 weeks from today because Emmy Vadnais, who is working today as one of our volunteers, has also been elevated, no longer a guest host on the New Thinking Aloud channel, but a co-host. And therefore, I want to make sure that our viewers get to know Emmy better personally, and she will be our special guest 3 weeks from today at our live stream. So that's an important announcement that I wanted to make. Two aspects to it, that Emmy is now a co-host on New Thinking Aloud, and that she will be available to field your questions directly 3 weeks from today in our live stream. So I'm going to just plow right into the questions. I know some of them are coming in already. And here's one that I think is very interesting from John Luxury. Please visit about LSD or similar microdosing of benefits or side effects. So I can say this about LSD for those of you who might be interested. I've probably, in my lifetime, in my youth, really, taken LSD about 100 times. And I don't think I've suffered for it at all. I don't think there were any negative effects from the LSD. In fact, what it did was sort of blow the crust right off of my consciousness. Having grown up in the 1950s and early 1960s, I think my first LSD experience was in about 1968. And for those of you who weren't alive in that period, the 1950s was a time of, number one, great prosperity, and number two, very much a feeling of conventionality. It was Norman Rockwell's America for me, growing up in Wisconsin in the 1950s. I was born, for those of you who are curious, in 1946. So during the decade of the 50s, I went from being basically 3 years old to being 13. And so those are the really formative years of one's life. And of course, as a young child, and not an exceptional young child, maybe bright, but, you know, typical kid growing up in the Midwest. Well, the one distinction was growing up Jewish in a small town in the Midwest. That did set me apart, I think, from other people in the community, but not much, just a little. Anyhow, LSD just blew the crust right off. So here I am in the university, and I'm starting to appreciate that the way I've been raised isn't the only way to be in the world. I was raised, you know, basically with a conservative ideology, politically speaking. I expected to go into the furniture business before I took LSD, and run a furniture store, or maybe go into the real estate business. My father was in both of those businesses. So those were my expectations for myself. But taking LSD was a major factor in changing all of that. Because by my senior year in college, I was already writing a senior honors thesis in the psychology of religious mysticism. I was protesting the war in Vietnam. My conservative political views had given way to a different perception entirely. I was part of the generation that said, never trust anyone over 30. That's basically how I felt when I was in my 20s, when all of this happened. So personally speaking, I feel like the person who I am today was very largely shaped and conditioned by psychedelic experiences. And I took LSD, I took peyote, I took psilocybin, I took mescaline. I had positive experiences consistently, except on one occasion. On one occasion, I had a slightly negative experience because at the time I lived in a farmhouse outside of Madison, Wisconsin, and the farmhouse was located right adjacent to a sewage disposal plant. And for some reason, in the middle of the night, I decided to go out and take a walk. And there I am with these sulfur smells and large flames shooting up where the sewage gas was being burned off. And I couldn't help but thinking to myself, this is like a diabolical setting. But as soon as I walked away from it, I was just fine. And I don't know, even if I hadn't been on LSD, taking a walk through a sewage disposal plant in the middle of the night could generate those kinds of thoughts, I suspect, in most people anyway. Now, microdosing has become very popular. I know that in Silicon Valley today, a lot of the high-tech people like to take small doses of LSD or psilocybin or other psychedelics while they're working. I think it facilitates creativity. I know Jim Fadiman, a psychologist I used to know quite well when I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, has written about it. He lives there in Silicon Valley, and as far as I know, people feel very positive about the microdosing. I knew people back in the days when I lived in Berkeley who would take full doses of LSD pretty much every day. I mean, they lived like they're high on LSD all the time. I don't think it's a good idea to do that. Microdosing, I have not really looked into these things deeply lately. If it comes to the side effects of taking psychedelics frequently, back in my youth, I probably overdid it a couple of times. And I think that, if you take LSD, for example, as I think I probably have done 3 days in a row, by the third day, it's not the same at all. You're just overdoing it at that point. It would be like going on an alcohol binge for 3 days in a row. It's not a good thing to do. I think I took very seriously when I was young the writings of people like Timothy Leary, Richard Alpert, and Ralph Metzner. And they referred to LSD as the equivalent of a microscope looking right into your own consciousness, a telescope maybe, looking inside yourself. Some people describe it as taking a shower from the inside out. So it's really, the way I approached it is I wasn't partying particularly, not that I never listened to music on LSD. I certainly did. All kinds of sensory experiences were enhanced through the use of psychedelic drugs. I didn't miss out on that part of it, but I can say that my general approach was one of pursuing self-knowledge. I saw that LSD was opening up a door to a reality that all of my studies at that point at the university in psychology, because I was a psychology major, had nothing to say about this experience. And intellectually, I was stimulated by it to pursue the career that I have. I began my graduate studies in criminology, looking at human deviance, studying criminals, working as a volunteer in the psychiatric unit of San Quentin prison, doing group therapy sessions with murderers and rapists. But as soon as I had further stimulation, not from LSD, but from basically a series of paranormal dreams, I switched into my unique program, an interdisciplinary individual doctoral major in parapsychology. And that's been my life's pursuit ever since I began that work. I entered the program in 1973, 49 years ago. So I would say that LSD was a major stimulus for me in pursuing the interests and studies that are the basis of the New Thinking Aloud channel today. And I think our culture still has an enormous amount to learn and to digest with regard to the use of psychedelics. And while I'm on the topic, I want to mention a very important book recently written called The Key to Immortality by Brian Muir-Rescue, in which he points out that psychedelics were an important part of the early Christian religion. In the early Mass, the wine that they consumed was not the kind of wine we drink today. Very probably, at least in many circumstances, had other potions of a psychoactive nature added into the wine in the early Mass. And also the soma described so eloquently in the ancient Vedic scriptures, a substance people would drink and they would become like gods, have altered states of consciousness. That was clearly something of a psychedelic nature, not to mention the mysterious substances that were imbibed in the mystery tradition, the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece. Muir-Rescue has done wonderful scholarship exploring this area and suggesting that, in other words, psychedelics have had vastly important influences on our culture, going back, well, I would say going back as far, according to Muir-Rescue's research, as Göbekli Tepe, one of the oldest archaeological sites on the planet. I think it is the oldest, in which we see a temple that was built somewhere around 12 to 15,000 years ago. And it appears there from the remnants that are found that the participants in the rituals in that earliest of human temples engaged in festivities involving the use of psychoactive components. So that's my answer to that question. Red Ruby asks, what was it like to meet and interview John Lilly? Does anything stand out the most? It was a long time ago, Red Ruby. And if you watch that video, which was briefly up on the New Thinking Aloud channel, but the original videos from the original Thinking Aloud series don't belong to me. They belong to the to the Thinking Aloud Productions, the original company, which is at this point owned by my former partner, Arthur Block, who is incidentally also the author of the Murphy's Law series of humor books. Now, when John Lilly showed up for that interview, and you can see it if you watch the video, he came into the office or into the studio wearing a coonskin cap like Davy Crockett. And I have to say, in retrospect, he was an amazing pioneer. I think that we still haven't fully plumbed all the wisdom in John Lilly's basic maxim. And I've made a point of memorizing it, so I'm going to repeat it for you right now. This is one of the most important thoughts that I have encountered in all of my inquiries into the nature of consciousness. And it goes like this: in the province of the mind, what you believe to be true is true or will become true, with certain exceptions to be determined by experience and experiment, or limitations, not exceptions, within certain limitations to be determined by experience and experiment. And then here comes the punchline. And those limitations are further belief systems to be transcended. That is such a powerful insight. I see it as John Lilly's major insight that came from all of the isolation tank work, the psychedelics that he did. Work with dolphins. He was an amazing pioneer. And I was rather awed by being with him. And how I know that's true, here he is in his coonskin cap. And we talked, we did, I think, a half-hour interview and then maybe another hour. But at around 45 minutes into the other hour, I was so in awe of this man and flummoxed by him. You've got to realize this is back in the 1970s, and he was talking to me about traveling to Russia and infusing Russian culture with his ideas. I just didn't know what to say at that point. I said to myself, John Lilly in Russia. In fact, I said that, I think, on camera. And I was wordless. I actually ended the whole program 15 minutes early. It's the only time I can remember in all the interviews that I've done that I was just sort of dumbstruck. So there, that's John Lilly. Here's another question from John Luxury, I believe. Do you feel 99.999% of the metaverse is near perfect, with a glaring exception being deviance of too many people on Earth? Well, I guess that's how you feel about it, John Luxury. I don't know. What can I say? I've been thinking about how arrogant it was of me to post, ask me your toughest questions. Like, I have all the answers to your toughest questions. The truth of the matter is, it would serve me well to be much more humble about that. And there are a lot of things I don't know. I do have a motto and that I've formed for myself. My motto is to love everyone and everything all the time. And it's really an aspirational statement. It's hardly a statement about how I am all the time. It's more a statement about how I wish I would be. But in any case, I also realize that in the process of loving everyone and everything all the time, there is a sense that everyone and everything all the time must be perfect. And why would I make a glaring exception that there are too many people on Earth? If I want to make a glaring exception, I might say there are too many viruses on Earth, or there isn't enough water on Earth, or something. But the truth of the matter is, I'm not smart enough to know when we've reached perfection and when things are imperfect. So I just figure what I can do is embrace the totality of everything as much as I can. And, I have to qualify that, because it doesn't mean that I don't want to distance myself from many, many things that are going on. I think, can I put it? Aleister Crowley. I actually like Aleister Crowley. I know many of my viewers think of him the way well, how can I put it? The popular press in his own day liked to call him the most evil man on earth. It was all drama, theater. I think of Crowley as a poet, a practitioner of ceremonial magic, a person who did embrace in his own way the dark side. But when I say love everyone and everything all the time, remembering when I interviewed, in fact, we did a live stream with somebody I admire greatly, Matthew Fox, the theologian. And we got into a discussion on this point. And he was saying, you mean you're going to rewrite the Bible to say you're supposed to love the devil? And I thought to myself, well, didn't Jesus say love your enemies? So maybe I'm getting a bit off topic here, but the things that seem to us to be imperfect, maybe it would be useful to us to just take another look at it. Like, it's fine. Loving everything and everybody all the time doesn't mean that I don't get disgusted with some things, that I don't feel a sense of revulsion about certain kinds of behaviors. Of course I do. It's only human. I don't like oppression. I don't like sexism. I don't like racism. I don't like lies. But all of those things exist in God's universe. So I think it behooves me on one level to take a stand against the things I don't like, but on another level, to embrace it all entirely, all of it, every bit, every earthworm. Okay, I'll get off my high horse. Here's a question from Raina Markheim, who says, good morning. I'm seeking guidance on continuing education in the realm of the paranormal in this life and beyond. Where do you suggest that folks should investigate? Well, Raina, one of the best places to investigate, if you can, is the United Kingdom, where there are about a dozen different colleges there that will offer courses and accept graduate students on studies in parapsychology. So that would be one example, particularly the University of Edinburgh, the University of Northampton, but there are other schools in the UK. In addition, here in the United States, West Georgia College is a place where you can study. And there are other smaller colleges. I don't know if you're looking at graduate study or undergraduate study, et cetera, et cetera. There isn't as much here as there ought to be. You could also check with the Parapsychological Association, the International Association for Remote Viewing, the International Remote Viewing Association, IRVA. There's also the Society for Scientific Exploration. In England, there is the Society of Psychical Research, SPR, the Society for Psychical Research there. They all have websites. They all have ongoing programs. There's also a wonderful organization based in Europe called the Scientific and Medical Network. They're very active, offering programs. So those are all good resources to look into. Here is a comment from John Alexander, who says, he's referring to John Lilly. He says, the last time I saw John, he was not at home mentally. And he had been doing, they call it vitamin K. He's talking about ketamine for weeks at a time. And yes, I know that is true. Towards the end of his life, from other reports that I received, John Lilly was probably overdoing the drugs. You know, he had married this lovely lady, Tony, and I think when she died, she was a marvelous support for him, but she died, she predeceased him. And I think he kind of fell apart after her death and began overdoing the drugs. But as people get close to death, many of them do take lots and lots of drugs, partially because they're in pain physically, emotionally as well. Partially, I think they think that the drugs may facilitate their transition. There were members of the original Thinking Aloud crew who were very close with John Lilly towards the end of his life. And so I heard many stories about what it was like being with him. And, you know, his behavior at that time often transcended the boundaries of normality and conventionality. Here's a question from my good friends Martha and Daryl Schoon. Daryl has been a guest on New Thinking Aloud many times. And Daryl asks, what has surprised you so far in your life? What a wonderful question. And actually, I think I was very surprised when I discovered that my friend, Daryl Schoon, who I hadn't seen in a long time, who had spent time in prison for drug dealing, had reemerged and become a financial wizard. That was a huge surprise. Since you asked, Daryl, you are a big surprise. Not only a financial wizard, but a spiritualist minister at the same time. I think you have lived a life full of surprises. And here's a question from Andrei Slavash-Brzezowski. What is your opinion about attempts to build a theory of psi, maybe a mathematical one? Do you think it is possible to develop some equations or to find a proof of the impossibility of such a thing? Well, I think both are true. We know from Gödel's incompleteness paradox that it's impossible that for a theory to describe everything. Mathematical theories can never describe themselves adequately. So every time you have a theory, you need a meta theory to explain the theory. And that's an endless process. So there is a sense that all theories of a mathematical nature about, let's say, the nature of consciousness are futile because they will always be incomplete, but at the same time, they're necessary. And my good friend, Saul Paul Sirag, with whom I lived at the Institute for the Study of Consciousness in Berkeley back in 1973, he has been working diligently on hyperspace theories of consciousness, along with people like Professor Bernard Grad. I am very, very positive about those theories. Obviously, they'll never be complete. They'll never describe everything. But on the other hand, if we don't explore these theories, our knowledge will always remain incomplete. And the very process of gaining knowledge means that you're going to explore theories and hypotheses that are only going to get you partway there. You'll never get all the way using theories or mathematics or logic at all, but you can't live without it either. Another question from Andrei Slavash-Krasowski. Do you have any opinion about the greatest successes or largest failures of parapsychology? Well, I guess it's pretty clear that the greatest successes are probably in the future. The largest failures, let us hope, are in the past. But I would say, to date, the most impressive work of which I'm aware in parapsychology are the archaeological experiments using remote viewing conducted by Stefan Schwartz many years ago. And we have many interviews with him about that work. The Alexandria Project, his underwater archaeological explorations. Stefan has shown very clearly that parapsychology has practical applications, and he has shown how to do it. I regard him as one of the most important living pioneers in the field of parapsychology. On the other hand, parapsychology has had some failures as well. Probably one of the largest failures was the work done by J. Levy. J. Levy was a medical doctor who became the successor to J.B. Rhine. Rhine left Duke University. He set up what was then known as the Foundation for Research on the Nature of Man. And J. Levy, Dr. J. Levy, was appointed director. And I visited that center in 1973 and witnessed Levy's research. It was very impressive. He had all these cages set up with mice. And as I recall, the mice were being, the cages were divided in half. And one half of the cage or the other half would at random receive a jolt of electricity. And Levy was researching the idea, I hope I'm recalling this correctly, I think I am, that the mice would use some type of precognition to avoid getting electric shocks. And you could think of it as being a horribly cruel experiment. And as I recall, a similar study was done by Helmut Schmidt back in those years. Helmut Schmidt did wonderful research with random number generators based on quantum mechanical principles. He was one of the main people inaugurating research in that field. And he set up a similar experiment using cockroaches. He felt that he didn't feel as bad submitting cockroaches to electric shocks as opposed to mice. But unfortunately, what happened with the Levy research is that he was caught cheating. He was caught doctoring the results, I think maybe manipulating the computer to make it appear as if the mice were very successful. And it looked like, wow, we have a clearly repeatable, high value parapsychology experiment here. But after he was caught cheating, all of that research was discarded. We will never know, I think, if any of it was valid, because Rhine said we just can't trust anything that Levy ever did. And I think researchers then began to feel like it's not ethical to submit living creatures, vertebrates just like us, to electric shocks like that. So I don't believe anybody tried to replicate the original findings reported by Levy. But skeptics might want you to think that this is typical of all parapsychologists, that they cheat or that they're gullible or that they're dupes. But I can tell you this, none of that is true. That the amount of, it's very unfortunate what happened with Jay Levy, and there are probably one or two other similar cases I know of in the field of parapsychology. I don't think it's any different than any other field of science in that regard. You get occasional cheaters. We're talking about human nature. So, but it was very unfortunate for the field of parapsychology. Sheila Rower says, hello, I love Jeffrey's advice to, quote, become the best version of yourself. But can he say more about how to do that and what that means? Well, Sheila, that's very hard for me to say because it's different for everybody. In my case, I think I somehow achieved that for me by creating my doctoral program, a unique doctoral program against all advice in parapsychology. Even today, more than 40 years, 42 years since I received my doctoral degree, the advice, standard advice given to young people, just as it was then, is get tenure. Get yourself established in some conventional field, because you'll be washed out if you, as a young person, proclaim that you're doing parapsychology research. You'll stigmatize yourself terribly. And I faced that. And I guess what I have to say to you is, don't be afraid of the naysayers. If you feel a calling deep within yourself, or as Joseph Campbell once said, follow your passion. And there are going to be lots of people trying to talk you out of it. There were certainly people who warned me not to do this, but I was too, you could say I was stubborn, you could say I was naive, and all of those things were true, but at the same time, I had a burning passion and I followed it without regard for the consequences. And it's not as if my life was a bed of roses, or who is it? I don't know if it was Gurdjieff or Gertrude Stein who said, roses, 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 thorns, 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 because there were all sorts of difficulties that I faced after graduating. First of all, the skeptics launched an effort that nearly succeeded to get the university to withdraw my degree after it had already been awarded. Second of all, I was shunned even by my colleagues in parapsychology after I was libeled by the skeptics. So you've got to be willing and sometimes to face the consequences of the choices that you make. Even if it's the right choice for you, there will be negative consequences. So you have to be prepared for that. But, for many people, being a parapsychologist or doing something that's going to put you, as Shirley MacLaine wrote, out on a limb is not necessary. You don't have to do the so-called heroic thing. Sometimes being the best version of yourself, not sometimes, in fact, all the time being the best version of yourself means being the best child for your parents, being the best sibling for your other siblings, being the best parent for your children, being the best friend to your friends. And I have to say, if all I did was to pursue new thinking aloud and pursue my interests in parapsychology and neglect those personal relationships, that would be far, far, far from being the best version of myself. Emmy Vadnais, the new co-host of New Thinking Aloud, asks, what projects are you working on that you can share? And will you keep doing interviews with New Thinking Aloud? And probably many of you know, it's public knowledge, I've Since winning the grand prize of the Bigelow competition, I have been invited and have joined the board of the new Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies. And so that institute is dedicated to exploring and furthering research on survival of human consciousness after death. So that's a responsibility I've undertaken. At the same time, I'm always had an interest. I've done many monologues about how we can explore the afterlife, the idea that there are psychonauts. Just as we have astronauts or cosmonauts, we have people who can explore inner space. They are people who are gifted at the use of psychedelics or meditation or hypnosis, people who have had near-death experiences, mediums, other sorts of pioneers, lucid dreamers, and the like. There are many, many different ways that people can explore the realm of consciousness. And I've always felt that exploring consciousness in this era, in the year 2022, it reminds me of the pioneers, let us say 600-700 years ago, who were for the first time making maps of new continents, North and South America, that had been unknown to the European world or even the Asian worlds really prior to that time, except for the indigenous people. And so that's what we're doing now. I think we have the opportunity to create workable guidelines and maps for exploring the realm of dreams, for exploring lucid dreams, for exploring what the Tibetans call the Bardo planes, for looking at the relationship between hyperspace and consciousness, for understanding the applications of hyperspace and consciousness to space travel. And for looking at the relationships between the whole field of ufology and survival after death. Those are all frontier areas that fascinate me and take up a certain amount of my time as I explore them. But I intend to always keep doing interviews for New Thinking Aloud as long as I am capable. You know, I am aware of the fact that I'm 75 years old. I have a pacemaker. I have a device called a watch band that has been implanted in my heart. I wear hearing aids. So I'm aware that my memory isn't as good as it used to be, although it's gratifying to know that people think I have a really good memory. So as long as my mind doesn't fail me, I'll keep doing these interviews. But I am aware of the fact that by the age of 85, in another 10 years, 50% of all the people who are 85 years old or older have Alzheimer's. So it's an issue. Okay. Jim H. says, would you consider doing an interview with Russell Brand? Yeah, I would consider it. I don't know too much about Russell Brand. I know he's a popular entertainer, but I'm sure he'd be a fascinating person to talk to. Paul Leslie, who has been a guest on New Thinking Aloud several times, says, hi, Jeff. Out of all the New Thinking Aloud guests you have had in many years, which particular guest had you the most starstruck? Well, I guess typically when people ask me that question, I come back to Jean Houston. And now Jean has not yet been a guest on the new Thinking Aloud series. She's been a guest on the original Thinking Aloud series. And I don't even think that particular interview is currently available. I am releasing many of the original New Thinking Aloud programs, typically one a week, and I keep them up only for a week. because I want to encourage people to subscribe to the subscription channel that Arthur Block, who owns the original New Thinking Aloud series, has up on Vimeo. Nevertheless, even with those, a whole slew of the original Thinking Aloud programs were purchased years ago and are available on the Gaia network. And I don't have access to any of those. And I think the one with Jean Houston is there. But Jean was very influential in my life early on. And I found her to be just an amazing teacher in those years, largely because of her sense of humor, her sense of drama. She was brilliant at combining the theatrical work of who is the Stanislavski method acting, and into the field of psychology. And her mystery schools were absolutely brilliant. I attended several years as a guest of Jean, her mystery schools. So early on, back in the 1970s and 80s, when I was exploring all of those fields, I felt like Jean Houston was the pioneer you needed to pay attention to. And I've been in awe of her for many, many years. She is wise, she is erudite, she is gifted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I have nothing but praise for Jean Houston. Suzanne Taylor, another friend, asks, what is the value of knowing that there's life after death? And earlier, I used the analogy of the discovery of a new continent. So I think the value of knowing that there's life after death is equivalent to the value of knowing that there's such a place as China, or there's such a place as India and you can visit, or there's such a place as Germany or Italy and you can visit, or you can go to Africa or Australia. It's part of reality. It's part of the larger map in which we are embedded. So I don't think it's any more important than that. And yet at the same time, there is a difference. And the difference is that you don't have to go far away to visit the afterlife. I mean, many people think that. They think, nobody has come back yet to talk about it. Well, that's certainly not true, but the afterlife is as close to us as our own breath or as our own dreams. I certainly had dream visitations from the afterlife. I know the doorway between this physical waking reality and the afterlife, it passes through the realm of dreams. That is the gateway. But that's how close we are to the afterlife. So considering that the afterlife is an intimate part of who we are, you don't understand your own consciousness if you don't get that your mind is open to that right here, right now. We have a wonderful interview that Emmy Vadnais just conducted with a psychologist named Matthew McKay. It won't be released for about a month. However, or 3 weeks, somewhere in there. Well, to be precise, the 14th of September is when it will be released, along with the meditation. Now, Matthew is a psychologist. He is affiliated with the Wright Institute in Berkeley, California, where I lived and went to school for the whole decade of the 1970s. It's a wonderful school, the Wright Institute. And he's written some 40 books. He's a specialist in self-esteem, amongst other things. But his son, Jordan, about, I guess, probably 10 years ago now, was murdered. Of course, it was a tragic thing. He desperately wanted to get in touch with his son. And he contacted my old friend, the late Ralph Metzner, co-author with Leary and Alpert of the psychedelic experience, based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And Ralph said to him, you can channel, and you get in touch with your son through channeling. And Matthew McKay said, I don't have any special powers. I can't channel. And Ralph explained to him, you don't have to have special powers. Anybody can do this. You just sit quietly with a pen in your hand, and whenever you feel an impulse to write a word, write the word. Don't even think about it. Just write the word down. And following that simple method, Matthew established ongoing communication with his own son to the point where they've co-authored 1 or 2 or more books together. And they're engaged in projects together. And he feels that although his son was tragically murdered and he'd give anything to have him back, he's still there. He's very much present in Matthew's life in an ongoing way. Another example of that feeling of ongoing presence with a child who has tragically been taken away. It was written about by none other than Congressman Jamie Raskin in his book, Unbelievable, I think was the name of the book. Now, that it was a political book. Jamie Raskin was the manager of the second impeachment trial for Donald Trump, which took place only days after his son died by suicide. But he writes in the book about the communications he felt he was getting from his son. He felt his son was there protecting him. He describes how shortly before his son's death, he lost his glasses. He was hunting everywhere for his glasses. And his son said to him, don't worry, Dad, they'll turn up, as glasses usually do. But they didn't turn up. And then after Tommy, his son, died, he was outside looking at their backyard and from the back porch. And there he saw a swarm of birds, but it was the most amazing swarm of birds, unlike any he had ever seen, because they weren't all birds of a feather. There were different birds and strange birds. And for Maryland, where he lived, there were cardinals and orioles and robins, all swimming, or not swimming, flying, but it was like a school of fish swimming in a circle together, a whirlwind right in the backyard. And it seemed quite stable. And he went indoors and he called his wife, come on out, you gotta see this. And they came out and he walked towards the birds. As he walked in their direction, they immediately flew away. And at that moment, he looked down at his feet, and there were his glasses. So the point being that we are so close to that realm that we call the afterlife. It's not a faraway, distant place at all. Okay, hope that answered your question, Suzanne. Mary Hitchcock asks, Dear Jeffrey, what is your belief in when a soul enters a body at the time of birth by choice? Okay. I better say, I just don't know. I would like to know, but you've got some who would suggest that it occurs at conception. You've got some who would suggest it occurs at birth. We have evidence in the field of possession that it can occur well after birth. At least in what was sometimes called replacement reincarnation, where a person can get sick and appear to die, the body is getting ready for burial, and all of a sudden the body may sit up and say, oh, where am I? Who are you people? And it can be a completely new personality coming in. So I guess I would say that we have a lot to learn about the relationship between the biological organ or organism and the soul or consciousness. How do these two fit together? My wife used to say to me, and for good reason, she says, you are your body. And at the same time, pure spiritualists would say, you're not your body, you have a body. I don't have the answers. And I think the most important thing I can do is to let you know that I don't know. And Mary Hitchcock also says, what do you think of the fate of, I'm pretty sure she means Homo sapiens. It's a Homo SS. It's not the SS, it's Homo sapiens. As our physical bodies modify with tech and science, it seems our souls will find the adequate physical form in which to operate. That's sort of the theory of a whole very popular movement known as transhumanism, that we'll upload our consciousness into computers and survive that way. I wouldn't want to rule it out. Let me say that. I like Star Trek. I like the idea of Data, the conscious robot, but is that ever a real possibility? I don't know. I'm very skeptical, but I can't say that I'm a scoffer. There's a big difference between skeptics and scoffers. Mary is asking me, can you think of anything more profound than the phenomenon of apports reported and described by Stanley Krippner? I'll come back to apports, but Stanley Krippner is the one who told me, and ever since he said this, I agree with him, that he doesn't like the word skeptic. He doesn't like the word debunkers. He doesn't like the word skeptic because the people who call themselves skeptics are hardly skeptics. They are true believers in materialism. So they're really more like religious believers than skeptics. He doesn't like the word debunker either because the word debunker implies that there's actual bunk, that they are debunking. So he said, let's call them scoffers. That's what they are. And I agree with him entirely about that. Now, and so I'm not a scoffer with regard to the transhumanist position that, you know, we will all become like conscious cyborgs in the future. I am skeptical, legitimately skeptical. I'm waiting to see what the evidence will be. Maybe it will turn out that that's true, but I haven't seen any evidence so far. The best thinking I know about it comes from my friend Stuart Hameroff, the theorist about consciousness, who has introduced into our thinking about the brain and the nervous system the importance of the microtubule structures within the neurons. And simply based on Hameroff's work, if the theorists about the singularity and transhumanism are correct, if we have to take into account microtubules, we are nowhere near the singularity that the transhumanists often suggest is going to be in our near future. Now, Mary is asking about the phenomenon of apports, as reported and described by Stanley Krippner. She says, is there anything more profound than apports? And I would say, in terms of profound, I think she means mind-blowing. Like an apport is when, you know, like a newspaper from the 1940s appeared in the room, just sort of dropped down from the ceiling in the seance room of the Skoll group in England. And they had it examined, and it was a legitimate newspaper from the 1940s. It was like brand new. How does that's pretty mind-blowing. It is, but even more mind-blowing than that are cases of full-bodied materialization. And there are many of them where there are photographs and testimonies that in the seance room, a spirit materialized full body, and you could touch it and you could talk to it. I think in one case I read about that you could dance with it. I have even heard, and here's where I do get skeptical, that you can have sex with the materialized spirit. There may be some shenanigans going on in some of those cases, but in any case, I think that we have to be open-minded about full-bodied spirit materializations. I have heard testimony about it from individuals whom I trust to be sincere and not dullards, but sharp-minded people. So I've never witnessed it myself. I'm not sure I've spoken to any parapsychologists who have witnessed it directly, but there are reports, many reports of full-bodied spirit materialization. Well, one of them came from none other than Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. So to me, that's about as mind-blowing as it gets when a deceased person materializes and they're in front of you, apparently in the flesh, and you can interact with them. And in the case of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the materialized spirit left a note for her. Now we're at the top of the hour. I'll be continuing for another 30 minutes. My good friend, John Alexander, who's been a guest on New Thinking Aloud, asks, is there a difference between continuation of consciousness and continuation of personality? What an interesting question. And I've wondered about it myself. Now, I'm pretty sure continuation of personality occurs. One of the most striking cases, I've interviewed Roy Stemmen about it, was the case of William Lang, an ophthalmological surgeon who died, I think it was in the 1930s, was it? I'm not 100% sure now, maybe the 50s. But in any case, it was in the 1960s when he began appearing in spirit form in the seances of, see, there's my memory now as an older person. I wrote about this extensively in the Bigelow essay, but at the moment, the name escapes me. It'll probably pop up. But in any case, William Lyon, the ophthalmologist, in personality, appeared in the seances of this particular medium for some 60 years consistently. And he was so convincing that his daughter attended the seance or a session. It wasn't a seance in the old-fashioned sense of the word, but she had a session with the medium, whose name still escapes me, and who was a healer. William Lyon's spirit would manifest through him in personality, and she heard about, my father is showing up through some medium. Couldn't be. So she showed up and she was prepared to debunk the whole thing. And instead, she was convinced this was her father. And so she supported the work of that mediumship, that healing practice, for decades. And when she died, she left a substantial portion of her will to the medium and his family. So that's the continuation of personality. It was no doubt the personality of that Dr. William Lyon persisted. Now, the continuation of consciousness might occur without the continuation of personality. And one way to think of that is the idea that we are like drops in the ocean of consciousness. We have a little membrane around us. At death, the membrane dissolves and we merge back into, you could say, the mind of God. And so we're still conscious, but we no longer have our own personality. I think we don't know. To answer your question, John, yes, there is a difference. And in terms of what actually happens, how many possibilities there are for experience after death, I don't think we've begun to explore the various options available to one after death. Certainly, reincarnation suggests a continuation of personality. The experiences of people who reincarnate seem to indicate that there is a continuity between their talents, their personality structures, their likes, their dislikes from one lifetime to another. But we have on record, let's say to be generous, several thousand cases of reincarnation. Doesn't mean that everybody reincarnates. There are many, many other options as far as I can tell. And some might be total nothingness, total oblivion, no survival of anything. I think that could well be an option. And other people may persist in their personality as hungry spirits haunting the physical plane, or they may be reincarnated in physical form in the physical plane, or they may explore the many, many other dimensions that are available to people in the afterlife. Arthur Bartosik says, "You are doing wonderful work, and thank you for educating the next generation. They really need you." Thank you, Artur. And Laura Newbert is asking, and Laura is one of our volunteers, is asking, what is my upcoming schedule of live events? And the next one I'll be going to is in Salt Lake City. It is the convention of the International Association of Near-Death Studies. I'll be giving a keynote address on the best evidence for the afterlife. And interestingly, that convention is open, I think, both online and in person. For those of you who have an interest in afterlife research, I might mention that Robert Bigelow is expected to be there to make an important announcement about research that the Bigelow Institute will be funding. So for those of you who are interested in researching the afterlife, it's a good place to be right there. The announcement will last only for an hour, but I think, and it will be available, I think, on videotape if you can't make it. Suzanne Taylor asks, if you ran the country or the world, what would you do? Thank you, Suzanne. What a great question. I used to think when I was younger, much younger, if I was in charge, I'd establish a holiday where everybody should be naked for the day. Now, obviously, it's a very naive idea. I'm sure it would not work out. But the thought behind it was that we should be naked to each other in the sense of not hiding who we are. And in a way, that's what I am working towards in the platform that I have. The idea that a parapsychology in general is that you can't hide. We would like to hide because we're all civilized people, and we're all at the same time that we're civilized, we are mammals, we are primates, and we have mammalian primate urges that are not acceptable in a polite society. And there's a conflict. Freud wrote about it directly in his book, Civilization and Its Discontents, which was required reading in my freshman psychology classes. So I think, that's one of the biggest issues confronting society today is that we are all hiding from ourselves. Ultimately, we not only, Freud pointed out, not only do we not want our neighbors to know what's really going on inside of our minds, we don't even want to know, which is why we have the Freudian unconscious. So can the person who is in charge of the country or the world do anything about that situation? I don't know. At least it could be brought up for discussion. And I think if I was in charge, I would encourage more and more discussions on a widespread level of the very topics that we're discussing on New Thinking Aloud. I don't know what can be better than that, than opening up the conversation to people. That's the real power of the presidency. It's not as if I would want to legislate, although frankly, I don't hide it from anybody. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I support the policies and the principles, by and large, with some exceptions, of the Democratic Party. I like what my friend Stefan Schwartz has to say about well-being, that politics should be oriented towards the well-being of people. I think that's what Democrats do. And you can see it in the statistics. Let me say this, I'll be a little bit political for the moment, because one of the most popular videos that has ever been out on New Thinking Aloud was released just about a month ago with Stefan Schwartz talking about remote viewing, the year 2060. He's still analyzing the data. But in the process of talking about it, he began bringing up things like the distinction between the red and the blue states. And he said, I'm a data person. Look at the data. Life expectancy, health statistics, education statistics. It all looks better, by and large, in the blue states as opposed to the red states. And we got an enormous pushback about that. People said, what do you mean? Everyone's leaving the blue states, moving to the red states. And that may be true to some extent. I moved from California to Nevada to New Mexico, but they all seem to go blue as I moved there. But for people who want to insist that Stefan is being political rather than simply, as he claims, data-oriented, I suggest to those of you who may be listening who are curious about this, go and look up the question of life expectancy, state by state. And you'll see there, the top states are California, New York, Massachusetts, are largely, by and large, the Democratic-run states. The worst states for life expectancy are the Republican states. And you can go on and on. There are a lot of states in the middle. So there are some Republican states near the top. There are some Democratic states near the bottom. But overall, if you look at life expectancy, which is a major indicator, I think, of the quality of life, you'll see that Democratic policies promote life. Oddly enough, I know that Republicans consider themselves pro-life, but their policies are not exactly pro-life. Anyhow, you know, the question bordered on politics. I try to avoid politics on New Thinking Aloud because I know it can be divisive and it can be a distraction from the deeper psychological, spiritual issues that I really prefer to talk about. But I don't want to hide the fact that I do have, you could call it a political bias if you wish. I agree with Stefan Schwartz, it's data-based. I think that's one of the differences, especially these days, between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats really do like to stick to the data. Republicans seem to feel that if you say it, because you said it, then it must be true, whether or not the facts support it. Now, okay, I'm going to get off of my soapbox. I don't want to continue with that any further. John Luxury asks again, congratulations on the $500,000 Bigelow Prize. RJ Spina, more interviews coming with Bigelow endeavors. Now that's a funny question. I guess he means, am I going to interview RJ Spina again? And the answer is, yeah, when we have another topic to discuss, we'll do another interview. I'm happy to do that. Sheila Rower has a question. Are there any beliefs or ideas that you held a few or several years ago that you no longer hold? Oh, what a wonderful question. Do you ever feel your future self is guiding you in changes? I sure feel like somebody's guiding me. I keep wondering, is it my future self? Is it my guardian angel? Is it my higher self? I don't know, but I do feel that I am being guided. I've been clearly guided through dreams to pursue the career that I've pursued. So now to get back to the question, are there ideas or beliefs that I held a few or several years ago? Well, I used to be pretty much a conventional Midwestern materialist in college. When I began my senior honors thesis on the psychology of religious mysticism, my thought at the time was that people who report seeing ghosts, people who talk about having mystical experiences, it's obviously some form of psychopathology. And I will study that. That's what I'll write about. This will be the topic of my dissertation or my senior honors thesis. And as I began reviewing the literature in preparation for writing this thesis, I came across the writings of Evelyn Underhill. I came across the writings of Abraham Maslow, and it became very clear to me before long that people who have mystical experiences are amongst the highest performing people in our culture. Maslow, for example, interviewed exactly the highest performing people he could find in his era, people like Einstein, people like Eleanor Roosevelt. And he found they all had experiences that were pretty much indistinguishable from the mystical experiences reported in the religious literature. And they claimed, as did the great mystics, that these experiences were central to their life and their career. And, you know, happened to me. Actually, of course, when I had a dream I've spoken about and written about over and over again in 1972, when Uncle Harry visited me at the moment of his death and changed my life. So what's the lesson in all of that is be open-minded. I know recently there was a person in the news who had gotten a lot of attention for his motto. I forget his name, but his motto was, be curious, don't be judgmental. And I think that's good advice for people. So to the extent that I have held judgments about people, I try to let go of them. Now, today, many people, especially Democrats such as myself, are very judgmental about you know who. And I am too. I'm very judgmental about you know who, whose name shall not, he whose name shall not be mentioned. Very judgmental about the idea that this person is doing everything he can to destroy our democratic system. So you know who and all of his friends I'm very judgmental about. At the same time, I tell myself, you know, don't be judgmental, be curious. At the same time, I tell myself, love everybody all the time. So I try to hold all of that at once. It's like I'm not letting go of my judgment. I'm not ready to do that. But at the same time, I'm not letting it dampen my curiosity. I'm not allowing it to exclude the love that I have for all of creation. I'm not going to say, I'm going to make a few exceptions. I'm going to love all of creation, except I've got a number of exceptions that I'm making. I don't do that. So, but at one time I would have. So maybe it's a sense of evolving. Okay, let's see, what other questions do we have here? John Alexander says, remember, paying jobs in the field are very limited. If you need funds for living expenses, right, it's going to be hard to go into this field. But you know, when I graduated with a doctoral degree in parapsychology, I didn't have any money. None. I had been a college student. I had, if anything, college student debt. Fortunately, not the kind of debt that students accumulate today. In my era, college was much more affordable, like $250 a quarter for tuition. But what John is saying is there are not many paying opportunities today for research in parapsychology, which is why the conventional advice is get your tenure first. Nevertheless, you know, if you're passionate about something, you want to be mindful of the fact that you're going to need to support yourself one way or another. And along the way, I had many other jobs completely separate from what you know me as today. At one time, I was a commodity trading advisor. I have been a licensed realtor in order to support myself at times. I was very fortunate, extremely fortunate, to have a wonderful wife who always had an income, and for almost all of our marriage, a much higher income than mine, fortunately. So things like that were crucial for me. So one shouldn't be totally naive. At the end of the day, if you're living in a physical body, you're going to need food, you're going to need a roof over your head. You're not going to be a very effective parapsychologist if you're homeless. Let's see what other questions we have. Andrei Slavash Krasowski asks, have you ever heard about a situation in which a parapsychologist or a person interested in parapsychology was not only verbally, but also physically attacked just because of his or her interests? Well, let me think about that. I have heard about parapsychologists who have been physically attacked about 10 years ago. To be precise, I think it would have been around 2008. I was at a conference in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and speaking as I typically speak about parapsychology. And the well-known researcher, who's also clearly in the parapsychology camp, Rupert Sheldrake, was one of the speakers. And I gave my talk, and one of the people at the conference came up and had a long chat with me after my talk. Then I left. I went back home. In those years, I was living in Las Vegas. And after I returned, I got inquiries from people. Who was that person you were talking to? What did you learn from them? What did they say? Because after they spoke to me, after I left, that person came with a knife and stabbed Rupert Sheldrake in the thigh. So I don't know why he did it, but yes, it might have had something to do with his ideas. It's hard to say when a person gets violent what really is their motivation. But there are cases where people who are well known, not just in parapsychology, but in the area of metaphysics, in the area of esoteric studies, such people have occasionally been known to disappear. I can recall another example where one such person was found, I think, in the woods, dead, tied to a tree. So are these just random occurrences? Are they related in any way to their interest in the paranormal? I cannot say for sure. I think that there are dangers. Let me put it that way. There are dangers. We don't know the nature of all of these dangers, but there are plenty of examples of people in every field of life who have suffered from physical violence, and it's hard to know if the physical violence was related to their particular interest. Other than if you're talking about, for example, a psychic attack, if you're talking about demonic possession, if you're talking about incubi, succubi, the folklore of the esoteric field is full of examples of what you could call lower astral plane entities bothering people. So yes, there's plenty of that in the literature. And I've got a few more questions coming in from Andrei Slavash-Krasowski, who says, in the case from Skoll you mentioned, there was something like an apport from the past. Now, I started to wonder if there were any apports like that, but from the future. Well, you're full of excellent questions, Andrei. Apports from the future. There are many people who suggest that that's what UFOs are, in fact, are apports from the future. So we can't rule it out. And there's, as soon as we begin to talk about the future, it raises enormous philosophical questions. When I interviewed the philosopher Christian de Quincey, who was very knowledgeable about the paranormal, he said precognition isn't real because the future hasn't happened yet. Since the future hasn't happened yet, it can't be known. Well, there are other people who say that's wrong. According to the theory of general relativity, the future has happened from God's point of view. Past, present, and future all exist in the now moment. And have you ever been anywhere else in your life but the now moment? So in any case, just as there are, you could think of precognition as information coming to the present from the future. Physicists are also interested in what is known as reverse or backward causality, causal influences from the future. So yeah, why not apparitions from the future? But how would you know? If an apparition came from the future, how could you be sure, let's say it didn't come instead from another very advanced planet? Assuming, let us say, the apparition is some sort of technology that doesn't yet exist here. So from a research perspective, it's very hard to figure all of that out. So, okay, we've got 3 minutes left, and I'll look at one more question from Emmy Vadnais, who will be our guest in the live stream in 3 weeks from today. Emmy, the new co-host of New Thinking Aloud, who says, how can we overcome fear of Psi collectively when we do have thoughts and urges and shame for them and don't want people to see them? Well, we have to become comfortable with ourselves first. We have to learn how to love ourselves unconditionally. Unconditionally means no matter what you think, what you feel, what you say, what you do, no matter what anybody else thinks, feels, says, or does with regard to you. That's what unconditional self-love is about. It's what unconditional love for others is about as well. So that's the ultimate lesson here, is about unconditional love. It's the most powerful force in the universe. And I consider myself, above all, an advocate for unconditional love. Okay, we have just 1 minute left. I want to thank all of you who have been with me. I want to also remind you that we publish a weekly newsletter. And it's a wonderful newsletter. It often includes poetry and artwork submitted by our viewers. It includes previews of the interviews and monologues that'll be shown, the videos that will be shown in the coming week. So for those of you who are regular fans of New Thinking Aloud, I encourage you to subscribe for free to our newsletter. And you can do that by going to the website of the New Thinking Aloud Foundation, which is New Thinking Aloud, all one word, and ALLOWED is how we spell aloud. It's not like talking aloud or something. And it's a play on words. It was originally, the name was suggested to me by my mentor, Arthur Young. But in any case, sign up for the newsletter there at the New Thinking Aloud Foundation website, where you will also find our searchable database. You can enter any search term you like. And we now have not only indexed our own videos, but the videos of the Parapsychology Association, Society for Scientific Exploration, the International Remote Viewing Association, and others as well. So it's a great resource if you want to use videos for your research. So that's it. It's been a pleasure being with all of you today. I thought the questions were excellent. I'll sign off now and look forward to our next live stream 3 weeks from today, when our special guest will be my new